Hello, and a very warm welcome to our first Ray Youth Research Dialogue in 2026. This is actually already our 25th Youth Research Dialogue. So yes, we started with this series quite a few years ago, and we're very happy that we're able to continue also this year. And we will implement 4 episodes this year, and most of you know this, that the Ray Youth Research Dialogues are conducted regularly with the aim basically to discuss evidence-based research from Ray and beyond. Yeah, today we are very excited to share first insights from our newest Ray monitoring service with you. Our surveys are conducted on a regular basis with beneficiaries of both the European Erasmus Youth and the European Solidarity Corps programs, European youth programs. So young people, youth workers, project team members have their say. Over the past 17 years, more than 125,000 project participants and around 30,000 project team members participated in this service. And they gave their valuable insights about their experience with the programs. The sneak peek today will give us first insights into the second survey round we are running currently, or have been running with this current program generation. We will discuss the motivation of young people and youth workers. So why do they get involved in the programs? We talk about engagement and learning of organizations with and through the European youth programs. We explore effects on the individual, on the community and the society level. We will discuss strengths and challenges of the programs and also possible implications for policy, practice, as well as the new generation of the programs. Our speakers today are Andrea Horta and Andreas Karsten from the Ray Transnational Research Team. Both work for Youth Policy Lab, a small research agency and think tank in Berlin. Youth Policy Lab hosts the Ray Transnational Research Team and the coordination. So we are very happy to have you both with us today. And last but not least, I also want to introduce the team. Domi Kilakowski will be our moderator today, and Domagoj Moric is responsible for the digital and the technical implementation. So that's from my side, and have a good one.
Hello, my name is Tomi Kielakoski, and I will be your moderator today. Today we will talk about the evaluations of the European youth programs, Erasmus Youth, and the European Solidarity Corps. When I think about these programs, I think about the quote from the person in whose memory the Erasmus program was named. Erasmus of Rotterdam is quoted as saying that learning and enjoyment must go hand in hand, and I'll now quote him. No activity can be continued for long if it does not, to some extent, afford pleasure to the participants. End of quote. Youth programs, at the best, combine both fun and learning. Today, we will hear about the current state of the programs and learn about the trends in the experiences of the participants, both individuals and organizations. And compared to preceding 24 dialogues, which started with short presentation, we decided to do things differently and go straight to the dialogical part, and you will see the results during the dialogue. I'll have opening questions to both of our speakers today. Firstly, to Andreas. Andreas, today we will get the chance today to hear about the findings from the newest round of Ray monitoring surveys for both programs, Erasmus Youth and the European Solidarity Corps. Were you surprised with the results?
No, mostly not. which in this particular case makes me very happy. I mean, we of course always dig into data sets to find things that are new, that are surprising, that are changing, either to the positive or sometimes also to the complicated. But we are very early in the current analysis pattern. We have really just started exploring data sets. We have worked with participant data sets so far only and not yet project teams. So it's really and truly a sneak peek we are providing here today for the purpose of both insight and entertainment. And I think one thing that positively surprised me is that sustainability, one of the younger thematic priorities of both European youth programs, has caught up and has gotten much better in implementation in the projects throughout both programs, which made me quite happy to see. And the one that surprised me less, but also made me less happy, that digitalization, the second new priority, in addition to participation and inclusion, which have both been very long-standing priorities of both programs, that digitalization still has not managed to catch up quite as well as we hoped it would. So those are maybe, to start off, two things that were surprising, one very positively and the other one thought-provoking.
Yeah, that's a good start. Another opening question. This one goes to Andrea. I guess one of the first questions that everybody thinks about is how well the programs serve the needs of young people. I started with an Erasmus quote combining learning and enjoyment, and he emphasized the importance of enjoyment. So first question to you, do young people enjoy participating in these programs?
Well, from what they tell us in the surveys, it looks like they do. Here's the first part of the sneak peek that we wanted to share today. And you can see that we gave them a scale from 0 to 10 to tell us how much they enjoyed their project. And we see the vast majority enjoyed it very much, gave it a 10 out of 10, which I still think we're kind of used to seeing positive ratings when we ask things like this. And I think sometimes we forget, because get used to it, how much it really means to give it a 10 out of 10. That's quite a good grade. So yeah, I think we're quite sure that participants enjoy the projects very much. And then you were talking about the needs of young people in general, and maybe it's a bit difficult to kind of, make a definitive list as to what are the needs of young people. But I think we can all agree that not only young people, but also young people while being young, we need connection. Young people have a wish to explore. This is also what they tell us when we ask them why they joined these programs. They want to get to know the countries, they want to get to know the people, they want to have fun, and we see that they do have fun. They also are at a time in their lives where they might want to become more confident about their own abilities, more independent. And we see also, not only in this round, but in the previous round as well, that the vast majority of respondents say that this happens in their project. Usually the numbers are about 80 to 90% of respondents say that they felt integrated in their project, that the project was meaningful for them. So we have similar scales to the ones that we saw, where we asked them how meaningful was the project, and the responses are similar. Also, they say that their project gave them confidence and autonomy. So I think in general, we can be quite sure that it does, that the programs do cater to these needs of young people.
Thank you, Andrea. And just to inform you, you froze for a while, but they heard you perfectly well. So no harm done whatsoever. That's splendid news you just offered us. Like I quoted, Erasmus himself thought that no activity can be continued for long if it does not to some extent afford pleasure to the participants. So maybe the fact that young people enjoy joining the programs is one of the things that needs to be emphasized. Andreas, do you want to answer this question as well? The needs of young people and the role of enjoyment?
Oh, there is not, I think, so much more to add. It's something that really makes us happy every time we dig into these data sets to see, even while many respondents are quite critical about some aspects of their project, that whatever things they're critical about and have rightful opinions, how things could be improved here or there, their overall happiness and enjoyment does not suffer from that. And that's always something really cool and nice to see, that that the things are in perspective small enough that they ask for improvement about certain kind of things, but the overall experience just remains a very positive one. And I think that's what we hope for. That's what we want to see, and it makes us happy to see it every time we have a new data set and a new survey round, like in this one. And it should make everyone watching now or later also very happy, because it's the result of your hard work. We are just the first ones to see it in the data, but we are not the ones producing the program and learning environment for this to happen. So all the project teams, all the national agency officers, all the people in the European Commission who work this is your happiness.
Yeah, and also the researchers need to be congratulated, because whenever we are doing surveys, if we see certain trends, it's an indication that those survey questions actually work and people answer to them in a similar manner. So congratulations to you all, the RAY research community. Well, the second thing I at least would like to know more about is the European aspects within European youth programs. So all of these cross-border mobility programs, they are expected to bring about more positive attitudes towards a shared Europe with common values, European identity. So according to your survey results, does this happen? And this one goes to, I guess, both of you. And we will soon see a slide on the screen. While we are waiting, I just want to mention that you have a possibility to ask audience questions. So you can do it. If you are following this on Facebook, please just type your questions there. And if you are watching in other matters, there are other ways to do that. Domakoi, can you show the Slido code while Andreas and Andrea are answering?
Very nice.
Yeah. So you will now see the Slido code on the screen, and it's simply Youth Research Dialogue YRD1. So Andreas and Andrea, go ahead.
So what you see here on the screen is a question, a set of two questions that we ask in our surveys, which we have started doing in this way with this program generation. So it's the second time now we asked like this. How close were you to Europe before your project, and how close are you to Europe now that the project has passed? And you see here the example of project participants in the volunteering projects in the Solidarity Corps. So individual volunteering, which we are celebrating 30 years of this year in 2026, as well as team volunteering projects, which are a fairly new feature. And so both those project types together. And you see before the project, quite a diverged picture. Some people not really close to Europe at all, but also several who have been quite close to Europe already before their project. But then you see after the project how the responses to the slider question really move up towards the closer to Europe side. And you also see that it's not everyone picks a 10 out of 10 here. Quite the opposite. The means are 6.0 before, 7.7 after. The medians are 6 and 8. So people also don't pretend to think that we want to hear that they are now, the closest to Europe they will ever get in their lives. But we also see that the projects and the program experiences really do produce a shift in how close people feel to Europe, because these projects in the end, what they do is very well is they make Europe an experience. You can feel it, you can touch it, you have people you identify with it. And so that's what we see in that question.
I also think it's interesting that for the after the project, there are very little people that answer very low scores. So I feel like this is also an interesting kind of thing to think of when you look at the graph, that there are very little people who go out of their project being like, I don't care. Yeah.
And it also shows that participants who are joining these projects are not all Europhiles, young people who are overly enthusiastic about Europe. So it tells that it reaches young people who are a bit skeptical or unaware of Europe. So I guess that's a good thing as well. So Andrea, you focus to take part in the programs. And in the past dialogues, we have talked about organizational learning, and we have emphasized the importance of organizational learning. And one of the features of organizational learning is that it transforms existing practices within the organization. So according to you, Fergus, does this happen? What's an impact of the programs?
Sorry, was muted. I was saying that what we see in this round, which is also very similar to what we saw in the last round where we asked the same questions, is that most youth workers who participated in youth worker mobility say that it was fairly easy to transfer the knowledge that they gained by going through this experience to their organization. So we see that the mean is 8.2, the median is 9. So it's actually quite high scores, which means there is a lot more than we expected, actually, that goes from this individual experience to the organization. Then we also have another graph about impact, where we ask specifically, okay, so you transferred this learning and what difference did it make? What impact did it have? And we see that most of the respondents also agree that it had an impact, or even a really big impact in their organization. And to put this in context, right now, somebody who's seeing this graph might think, okay, but what impact and how does it have an impact to have gone through youth worker mobility? And from other thematic projects that we're doing, we learn about organizational learning and development, but also very about competency development. We know that the way that trainings in general have an impact at organizational level is because they help the professional development of individuals that then come back and can support their colleagues and can get things done, basically, and can bring specific methods and specific practices that get incorporated immediately. This is how it usually has an impact at organizational level. Another important way is they bring new connections. They meet new people, they collaborate with other organizations, and these connections often last. And there are also two important things to notice here. One is that when we talk about organizational impact or knowledge transfer to an organization, you might think, if you don't know the youth field very well, or if you haven't been looking at this situation for a long time, like we did for Red Learn, you might think that means that somehow at organizational level, all of this knowledge that comes in from trainings and from youth worker mobilities is being stored in some sort of system, and that's not how it works. Usually, organizations change when the right people has the right skill. A very simple example is when the right person learns to apply to the right project, suddenly the whole organization can apply to the project and can benefit from this. Then when, like I said earlier, when little practices are brought and applied immediately, that also changes the organization. So this is the way in which the programs kind of get to the organizational level. And then the other thing to take into account is that for this to happen, you need the individual who goes to come back and be excited or be willing or ready to share what they learn. You need them to learn something that can be implemented when they come back. You need them to have a specific role where they could come back with new knowledge, and that can make a difference depending on the role that they have in the host organization. And so what this means when we see these graphs where where participants tell us, okay, transferring the knowledge is relatively easy and it does have an impact, is that this is already happening for a lot of the organizations. In the graphs, you can see about 80% say that this already happens. So that means the programs do have a way to reach the organizational level and to have an impact at that level.
Thank you, Andrea. We have 2 audience questions, which they wrote in Slido. That's wonderful. Thank you for that, and we'll take them. We'll take them now. And if there's time, we'll come back to the issue of which Andrea talked about, how these individual learning experiences taking part in the program really turning to collective ones. There's a question about the role of global geopolitical events. Examples are the Russian invasion in Ukraine and the rise of authoritarianism in the USA. How do these geopolitical events do they have an impact on the results? What do they know about that? Any enlightened guesses or direct knowledge-based answers for this question about the role of geopolitical events? This one, I guess, goes to both of you.
No evidence-based answers yet, because we haven't looked at these questions from that perspective yet. We know from the 2023 surveys and our analysis of them that yes, this produces quite a shift. It produces a shift in the motivations of people why they join the European Youth programs. What we have seen in the past, and I would expect this to be even stronger now, is that motivations are shifting from individual learning aims and goals to the wish and desire to influence societal developments and to change socio-economic and socio-political conditions for young people. So it was really a strong shift in 2023, and I would expect that to continue and grow stronger. It also has, of course, an effect on the topics in any project format, from youth exchanges to youth worker mobilities. It has an effect on what youth workers need to be able to address in terms of mental health struggles of everyone in the field. So there is a whole array of consequences these broad global developments have, but we haven't dug into the data set deep enough to be able to show you graphs for it yet and quantify these changes in our very fresh data set.
But it does remind, if I may, this is not related to the monitoring service specifically, but it does remind me of an experience that I had while interviewing organizations for our project on neighbor and partner countries, like where we looked at projects that happen between program and partner countries. And I was interviewing a person from a Ukrainian organization that said that when the Russian invasion happened, they had this network of connections that they had built through the programs that were actually really useful to help their community, to find people if they needed to flee, to have somewhere to go. And I thought this was a very, very kind of meaningful and telling example of how the programs build this web of support and how it is useful actually in times of crisis. So we don't see it in this monitoring service, but I do think it's relevant to bring it up.
Yeah, I can really understand why why this question was posed. If the European youth programs are about European shared values, and if these values are attacked themselves, so it's it makes sense to inquire about these values and how young people see the question. Another question is about young people with fewer opportunities and what do we know about that? So the question goes like this: do you have new data on young people with fewer opportunities and their participation in and effects of the programs? And I suspect that you do to a certain extent, because we sort of anticipated this type of question. And about the audience questions, we are waiting for slides. About the audience questions, please do post more questions, so we'll answer them while speaking. So what we had was about educational background of the participants.
Exactly. So something that the European youth programs used to be very, very good at is being quite reflective of the level of educational achievement in the overall European youth population and that was very reflected in the program. So most of you know that under the European Education Area policy frame of the European Union, there is the goal to bring 45% of all learners to a higher education degree, to a tertiary education degree, bachelor, master, PhD. And across Europe, that goal has almost been reached on average, but there is quite a wide range between some countries where the level of this higher education achievement is already way past 45% and at 65 or 70%, and some countries that are trailing a little bit in this development. But overall, the European Youth programs tended to be very good at having roughly 50% or so of young people with a higher education degree. That drastically changed in 2023 as a result of the pandemic. We know from research of colleagues that the pandemic has led to many young people not having access to and or resources for extracurricular activities anymore, including the European Youth programs. So what we were hoping is that this larger societal effect is slowly losing track and improving, and that we would see this kind of change also reflected positively in the European Youth programs. And I'm happy to say that at least for Erasmus Plus, that is true. So the amount of project participants with a higher education degree has decreased between 2023 and 2025 to varying degrees in different project formats. So youth worker mobilities always have a very high level of higher education participants, simply because in most countries the formal education to become a youth worker is tied to a bachelor and or master degree. So it makes sense that it's very high there. But for youth exchanges and participation projects, we're happy to see a drop in getting very, very close again to the European average of 45 to 50% of young people who have a higher education degree. So that was really nice and positive and happy to see. And we have also the same overview for the European Solidarity Corps, exactly, where unfortunately that development is not yet visible, which also has to do, again, in part effects of the pandemic and part effects of the overall insecurity that many young people feel and experience and have right now, a tendency for, in particular, individual longer volunteering placements to be taken later in life rather than earlier. And so people are already further in their educational pathway and are closer to obtaining a higher education degree or already have it. So in Erasmus Plus, we see what we were hoping to see, younger people returning to the programs, people with different educational pathways returning to the programs. In the Solidarity Corps, we don't see that yet.
Any hypothesis why this might be going on with the European Solidarity Corps? I mean, the programs are different, but...
I mean, I already tried to touch on this a little bit just now. It's, I mean, we see this also from European volunteering surveys across the Union and beyond, that the average age of volunteers has increased in the past couple of years quite drastically in part. And that certainly has to do with it, that when you do a volunteering year as a gap year or an engagement year after your bachelor or master thesis, rather than between secondary school and then going to university, that has a huge effect on it. But then also, unfortunately, in particular, longer term volunteering is something that requires a socioeconomic context in which this works, but then also an encouraging environment and a positive outlook to the future somehow, all of which are things that young people have less and less of, sadly. And so I am certain there's also quite a bit of the complexity of multiple crises that young people experience that play a role into that. But ultimately, the answer is probably too complex to be able to explain now in 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. But I would say that are probably some of the directions that our own data sets for, and then also look at connected data sets like the European Social Survey, which we always use for comparison, the World Values Survey, the Eurostat surveys of young people, and so on. But too early to really be able to say, that's what we think are the ultimate 2 or 3 reasons, but those are directions of our thinking.
Yeah, we have touched upon this question in the earlier dialogues, but the person who posed this question asked about young people with fewer opportunities. So can you describe in a couple of sentences what do we know about the participation of young people with fewer opportunities based on the earlier research?
Based on earlier research, I mean, beyond what I just said about levels of educational attainment from this current very fresh data set, nothing else yet, right? That's what we have managed to look at. Everything else will follow. That's why it's called a sneak peek. We know something actually very positive about the European youth programs in a deeply nerdy study that we undertook to look at the learning outcomes of young people and participants in both programs. And that is that the socioeconomic background actually doesn't make a difference to the learning outcome. So the effect that we very often see in educational processes called the Matthew effect of cumulated disadvantage, that when you go into a learning process with fewer opportunities around you, your parents not having been to university, it's harder for you to go through a bachelor or master's program than it is for someone whose parents have been to university themselves. And so the European youth programs in their learning formats, even the longer ones like volunteering, manage to level the playing field for young people, which is really a powerful role that they have and can play, which also has to do with the principles of non-formal education and youth work and all of that. But so that's something very nice. What we don't yet quite know is how also in relation to young people with disadvantages across Europe and how many more young people are, for example, now at risk of being close to or being drawn into poverty, which is something that across Europe has heavily increased, how many, how that is reflected in the participation in the programs. We don't know yet. And I have no useful speculation about that either. I don't know.
What about you, Andrea? Is there something you want to add? There's an audience questions coming up, which I will throw on your side of the ball,
Okay.
of the field. Yeah.
I don't think I want to add anything about young people with fewer opportunities. So
yeah,
you
there's
can
a question about
shoot.
yeah. There's a question about organizational impact, which we talked about before these questions. So the question goes like this: on organizational impact, do we have any details on the levels? Cultural skills and so on. So the person who posed the question would like to know a bit more, how does the impact happen? What are the topics or areas or competencies there this actually happens?
Yeah, yes, I think I talked about this already a bit before. I think of course, there is an impact at the level of having more youth workers that are more comfortable with international and intercultural youth work, which is maybe, I think, if you, as we do research in this field all the time, not something so salient, but I think for many local organizations, they're trying to embed international youth work in their activities, and it's not really that easy all the time. And so having people going to European trainings kind of helps that process. Then, like I said earlier, like most of the impact that, or because I know this from the focus groups that we did in RailLearn, where we asked what kind of things do people bring back, and organizations talk about specific tools or specific tools for non-formal education, specific activities, specific ways to engage young people. And then something that does have a big organizational impact but maybe it's a bit difficult to frame it as learning, even though it often comes up when you ask about learning, is people bring connections. And actually earlier when we saw this graph about impact, we saw that actually a very big minority said that they weren't sure if their participation had an impact. And this is I was a bit puzzled by this when I first saw it, because even respondents that said, yes, it was easy to transfer my learning, a lot of them said, or a lot of the ones that said, I don't know if it had an impact, had said it's easy to transfer my learning. And so then I was trying to figure out what that means, like what are they transferring that they don't know whether it has an impact or not. And then we saw that these people also said that their networks had been meaningfully expanded during their project. And so this is where this kind of ambiguity comes up. I think they just got very interesting contacts, came back, and they don't know where this will take them, but they kind of have the feeling that it might take them somewhere. So yeah, I'm trying to think if I am missing something. Yeah, I don't think so. So specific personal skills that can be transferred, specific practices that can be then reinstated in the organization, contacts and like networking, contacts with other organizations that they can then apply together for projects, or they can partner for whatever it is that they need to do, and contact with the international youth work, and being comfortable with having with speaking English, and with having exchanges with youth workers and young people that are not from their local context. I would say this is more or less the impact that they have. And also, which I think is maybe what you think when you send people to trainings, they can have like a very strategic organizational impact. For example, they can, for example, there are people who go to a training about managing projects, and then they'll learn to manage projects better, but you need it to be the right person at the right time. And this happens sometimes, but I don't think is the bulk of the results that we see.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. Well, as everybody heard, this is a topic you have reflected before. And if you want to know more, if any one of you in the audience wants to know more, we tackled this question in detail in our Youth Research Dialogue held in December last year, with Andrea attending and also Darko Markovic attending. And there's an earlier dialogue as well, which tackles the topic. So I highly recommend listening to that. It gives you more information on the processes, how this happens, and how it changes the organizations, and also what is required of organizations as well. There's a comment to what Andreas just said about young people with fewer opportunities, and it's on Slido by Marcello. It says this: in our internal analysis, fewer opportunities participants show more change, especially in career and further study choices. So, Andreas, do you want to reflect on this remark?
I mean, we generally don't track further study and career choices through the survey and research work that we do in Ray. We certainly also see that the self-perceived improvement of learning and knowledge is a little bit higher among some groups of young people with fewer opportunities, not across the board, but we see, but it's not so the development of skills around democracy, around competences for lifelong learning, those are largely identical. It's very often the self-perceived change that is a little bit stronger and maybe, a little bit newer and taken less for granted by some young people with fewer opportunities. Career and study choices we don't track. So, but yeah, I can very well imagine that it does that.
So far, we have talked about the strengths of the European youth programs. Are there any topics with which we could do better? And this one goes to goes to Andrea. Yeah, and we are waiting for the slides, but you can start already.
Yeah, one of the things that that we wanted to call attention to is also not all that new. We saw a similar trend in the previous survey, is that when we asked participants of volunteering projects, especially individual volunteering projects, whether they had any safety concerns during their project, almost 1 in 4 said that they did have some safety concerns. And we also saw in the next slide that when we asked were these addressed, many of the participants answered towards the middle of this scale. So especially compared to other questions, like I said earlier, most people are most respondents were responding quite a positive way. Are excited about what they learn, and they say yes, this worked. But in this case, they're giving us a signal that says no, this could have been addressed better. So this is maybe when you see this graph, you might be wondering what kind of safety concerns could these be. We didn't ask explicitly about this in an open question, but we did ask in general, what could participants, what would they change in the Solidarity course, if anything? And among the many responses that said nothing, it was the project of my life, I wouldn't change anything, there were some that give hints as to what this might mean when people say they had safety concerns. And I'm going to share 3 of the ones that came up very often. One of them is related to housing and living conditions. Again, these are like quick, open-end answers, and people don't elaborate exactly what happened, right? But some participants seem to be uncomfortable or perceive their housing conditions as unsafe. And interestingly, we see a similar concern from the organizations in a different project, again, in our project related to collaboration between program and partner countries. We got to talk to organizations and ask them a similar question, and they also said that it's very difficult for them to find proper housing conditions for their participants. In fact, they say this is a barrier that makes it difficult to bring organizations into the program, new ones, because when they see what they're supposed to do with the grant that they get, they don't think they're going to be able to provide good housing and a good experience for their participants. Then another thing that they mentioned related to safety is that they would like better mentoring, that they would like more guidance and more support especially when they just arrived, and especially in cases where they don't feel so well integrated in the program. We know from answers to all the questions that most people do feel integrated. And do feel good, and most projects are welcoming and inclusive. But when that doesn't work, it seems like participants are wish that there was a better support system for them. And then the last thing that came up were somewhat vague. Again, this is just an open question in the survey, but references to their organization, the host organization, not doing exactly what was said in the contract, or not behaving in the way that they expected, and this made some participants feel unsafe. And interestingly enough, again, in the project with neighbor and partner countries, when we talked to organizations about that, they were feeling the same way. They were also saying that sometimes most participants and most volunteers are great, but when it doesn't work, when volunteers have problems or create problems, they also don't know what to do. So I think that the thing to take from this is that on both sides, participants and organizations seems to be asking for a bit more mediation from the programs and a bit more organization and support for both sides. That said, again, I feel like it's important to put this in context, that this is the minority of the cases. Most of the cases work remarkably well, and most projects make participants feel welcome, and most organizations are really happy to have volunteers and find them very valuable. Also something that they told us when we talked to them, the organizations told us when we talked to them in Relearn about the value that volunteers bring. And also important to mention, like I said, this is not really a new finding. We already saw this trend from the previous survey. And so Salto ESC is already doing something about it. It's already preparing trainings and is already working on this. So this is something to keep in mind, especially maybe while we're trying to design the next generation of programs, but also something that we're already on the way of fixing, and that is not that doesn't overtake all the value that these volunteering projects provide.
Yeah, that's good to hear. If everything would be perfect, people would be really suspicious. So it's good to know that there's a bit of room for improvement as well. It's time for the last question. There's an audience question asking for the European Solidarity Corps. Volunteering, especially long-term, should there be some rules for not accepting higher educated participants to give space for others? Now, I won't be asking this. I will be widening it a bit and to ask about the future. So what works and what should be preserved and what should be done differently? And is there something that policymakers and decision makers can do to support these ideas? We started with Andreas, so it might be fair to let Andrea have the last word. So Andreas, first to you about the future. What should be preserved? What they might need to change?
Well, because we are running out of time, I will actually take the audience question and narrow it down to that. I think that's so rules for not accepting higher education participants to give space for others. No, I really don't think so. I think what we have to do instead is create conditions for people in different educational pathways and also younger people to return or get into the programs, because we know that the independence from parents and parental households is being delayed for many young people across many parts of Europe, and that also changes their ability and their willingness and their supportiveness to participate in something like the European Youth programs. And that's where we have to start thinking, how do we create for someone who has very little money, still has to live at home, how do we create conditions that makes it financially and also philosophically feasible and attainable for them to participate in the European Youth program? So rather than forbid some groups of young people to participate, I think we have to create conditions so that the young people that we are missing in the European Youth programs feel properly enticed to join them.
So the producer of the show just informed me that they are running out of time, but I still want to give the last word to Andrea. So go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would also say that we shouldn't put a cap on how many participants with higher education should be allowed in. And then to add something on a different point as to what to keep in mind, I think from again the projects that I'm doing on organizational learning, I think looking at the future, one thing to keep in mind is to make sure that the impact of participating in one project is longer than the project itself. And of course, this is not news for anybody. This is something that we probably would all agree that we want to do. But then the question is, how do we do it? I mean, I of course kind of give solutions, but sometimes when I hear stories about how things that are learned or that are brought from projects try to be implemented in an organization, I feel like it would be interesting to have some space to pilot new ideas, to see if things actually work. For example, I'm going to share a quick story because I think it makes the point better than if I try to talk about it abstractly. Recently, I was talking to somebody who showed me a tool that they developed during a Key Action 2 project, and it was for measuring the impact of youth work. And they had taken a very long time developing it. It was a really good tool. And they, had worked hard to create it, and then realized after, when the project was over, that it's actually too complex to use it in practice. So they have it, it's great, but it's not really useful for them. And so the question would be, how do we, in a situation like this, how do we make it easier for them to work on it again without feeling like it's double funding, without knowing, feeling like, okay, I don't know what to do with it and drop it, How do we make it easier to kind of build on what we're creating, what is already there from one project?
Thank you, Andrea and Andreas, for these wise words, and thank you for this sneak peek. I, for one, am anxiously waiting for more, and I'm certain that the European Youth Field will be anxiously waiting to hear more. So thank you too. And thank you also to our audience for joining our first Youth Research Dialogue in 2026.
In case you would like to watch this episode again and maybe share it with your colleagues, we have really good news. It's always available on YouTube channel, but also on our Facebook channel as well.
Yeah, and from my side, really thank you to both of you, Tommy and Tomago, and to Andrea and Andreas. It was really, really interesting dialogue. So thank you so much for that. We continue on the 30th of April. So mark this date already in your calendar and check our website as always on social media for updates. We'll actually have interesting episodes on 30 years of volunteering together with the Salto European Solidarity Corps. So happy to see you then. And that's it. We went a bit over time, but I think it was worth it. Have a nice day. Bye.